of so-called Western free countries, allow these brutal murderers to be welcomed into their countries and to have a regular dialogue? These are the questions I want answered. There's a high-ranking Shia cleric in Iran named Ayatollah Montazeri. He was one of the founding fathers of the Islamic Republic. He's now coming out condemning the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and saying this is no longer Islamic, nor is it a republic. And when I hear things like that from officials at the high levels, the clerical level, and those that are in power speaking against this regime, that gives me hope. People like that are adding their names to people like Ayatollah Burujerdi. Ayatollah Burujerdi was imprisoned years ago for advocating for the separation of religion and state. Maybe he was alone at that time saying such controversial things, but now there are more people adding to this. The regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran is slowly crumbling, and that brings me much joy. Let me paint you the picture of current Iran and to give you an indication of why we must be hopeful for the future. You have a population of 70 billion people. 70% of those are under the age of 30. These young people want freedom. They want to be able to say what they want, dress the way they want, listen to whatever music, and a lot of them are university educated, but they don't have access to proper jobs because there's not enough to go around, so they're hopeless, leads them, some of them, into a life of drugs. There's been a huge spike in HIV/AIDS and prostitution. Then you have a separate group, you have the workers, some of them, actually most of Iranians, working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet, who do not have the right to unionize. In fact, just for fighting against the right to equal pay, like Mansour Osanlu, one of the leaders of the bus drivers union, he was imprisoned and had his tongue sliced in order to silence him. Then you have half of the population, which are women. They're at the forefront of a lot of this change we're seeing. Their life is literally, under the law, worth half of a man. Their testimonies are worth half of a man. There's inequality in divorce, inheritance, custody, of course the way they dress, and jobs. They are very educated though, so that's why I'm having a lot of faith in them. They have a lot of encouragement and power, so that's that group. Then there's the ethnic minorities who are discriminated against and are deprived their right to practice their mother tongue in certain cases, like the Kurds and the Turks. You have the religious minorities who are being persecuted, particularly the Baha'i. Forget the pictures. You have the Baha'is who are discriminated against. A lot of times they are not even able to get the job of their choices. They cannot enter universities. And 7 of their top leaders are right now in prison and could be facing execution soon. You have Christians as well persecuted. There's 2 ladies right now, Marzieh and Mariam, and just for converting from Islam to Christianity, they're imprisoned and could be facing death penalty. Homosexuals, of course, do not have the right to be themselves. And there's the case of Makwane Mouloudzadeh, who was engaging in homosexual acts when he was 13 years old, and as a result he was imprisoned, and when he turned 18 they carried out his execution. Makwane Mouloudzadeh is not the only minor who is facing this threat. There's currently 160 cases of children who are on death row that we've documented. My organization is Stop Child Executions. We're trying to put an end to minors on death row. There's already 3 children that have been executed this year, 8 were executed last year, and 12 the year before that. And this is despite the fact that Iran has signed in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Charter of the Rights of the Child, which blatantly forbids the executions of those who've committed offenses before the age of 18. What does that leave you when you have all these groups that are suffering? It leaves a small minority of hardliners that are vulnerable, a small minority that does not have any more legitimacy in Iran, a small minority that has been ridiculed in the world, and who has at the head of defense Ahmad Vahidi, who's wanted on charges of the involvement of the 1994 bombings in Buenos Aires. You have these criminals in power. Now, I want to make it very clear, by demonizing those in power, I am not advocating for any kind of military intervention on Iran. I think this would be, it would have a backlash effect. And any advancement that Iranians have made thus far trying to advance human rights and democracy and freedom would just be wiped away. So what can be done? One thing is clear: we must not recognize this illegitimate government. Leaders around the world cannot recognize Ahmadinejad or Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei as the leaders of Iran. We must support the civil society and isolate the hardliners at all costs, whether that's through asset freezes or travel bans, provisional arrests through Interpol of those recognized officials that are involved in crimes against humanity. These are certain things that I've learned from Dr. Payam Ahavon, who's going to be speaking next, and I'm sure he's going to go in more detail about some of these things. I hope for the eventual prosecution at The Hague at the International Criminal Court of some of these, those that have been implicating crimes against humanity. And one thing that I stress, and I just came back from Geneva where I spoke at the UN Human Rights Council, and one thing that I demanded was for an emergency UN Human Rights Council session, an international commission of inquiry to investigate the human rights abuses that have taken place pre- and post-election. Simple things, just pushing for Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial and arbitrary executions, to go into Iran to investigate what's taking place. And one thing that the international community can do is supporting more media, more technology, so that Iranians from within the country can have their voice heard outside. What I think is that it's time for the United Nations to live up to its name and truly represent nation states that, with leaders that represent the people, the populations, not authoritarian regimes that suffocate and massacre its own people. I believe that a free, democratic Iran with a focus on human rights will have a domino effect and bring stability to the Middle East and then world security. So I'd encourage you to stay in touch with the organizations that have put on this event, and to do your little part to try to be a voice for those on the inside of Iran. And I would love for you to hear what Dr. Ahavon has to say, because he's got some very insightful suggestions, and I think together we can bring this